But if you campaign actively, if you whip up, especially if you're touching these racial and in group out group feelings, and when you have consistently argued that the entire system is itself illegitimate, and then you get to power, and you get to power not because you won. Hitler's ceiling was 37%,
Hmm.
but the conservative traditional forces thought he could be used. They liked the support that his followers brought into the broad right wing movement. Hindenburg thought he could be manipulated, made a figurehead. They didn't take him seriously.
Well, that is what has been so irresponsible about the rest of the Republican establishment, the way they have enabled him. And I mean, just to see the
The appeasement.
I mean, it
It's
just
appeasement.
it's
They're
beyond
frightened of
dis
him.
it's beyond disgraceful. I mean, you'd think that their egos wouldn't allow for this kind of this lickspittle approach to his ascent, but when you look at people like Paul Ryan and I mean Ted Cruz going against him and then now, working the phone banks for him. I mean, it's incredible behavior where you have someone like Mitt Romney, who's a standout now. It's like the one guy with a spine gives a speech, I don't know when it was, maybe 8 months ago, saying this guy is totally unqualified to be president. I mean, Mitt Romney looks like a saint at this point.
They're all Hindenburgs at this point, and they're terrified. The reason they're not taking him on even now is because they're terrified that their own voters are attached to him. I mean, you look at his economics, okay? Free trade and the debt. These are things that the Republican hardcore caucus, the Freedom Caucus, the top 100 right-wing people who had ideological litmus tests and purity up the wazoo. This man has completely destroyed any of their economic, let alone their debt fixation.
Hmm.
But none of them, in fact, they all have to support him. Why? Because their own voters are supporting him, and they are terrified that if they turn on him, the voters will turn on them. And once you see that moment when they're too frightened of their followers to act, then you realize how terrifying this would be were he to win. Because were he to win, almost certainly the House and the Senate would be with him. Almost certainly then he would be able to shape the Supreme Court. There would be no institutional resistance except the Republican Party itself, which has shown itself to be incapable of resisting. So that is where this is deeply dangerous. And let me point out, I just want to put this scenario out there because I think it hasn't been put out there before. And we are at war. And the war could get worse. In fact, his very election, I think, would provoke a wave of jihadist terrorism. Now, what would his response to that be? I think there's no question that the Constitution as we've known it would be in tatters overnight. This is a man who has openly advocated the torture of prisoners of war. He's openly advocated the mass murder of civilians. He's advocated the killing of the families of
Yeah.
terrorists.
But what's confusing about this for his supporters is he's also advocated an isolationism that makes Hillary look like the warmonger, right? He's
Right.
insisted that he was against the Iraq War, even though that's at best ambiguous, but he's advocated a retreat from the world. I mean, basically, he just wants to build a wall and hunker down, if you take him in at least most of his moods. And many of the people who support him and who supported Sanders, frankly, this is music to their ears. We don't need to be the world's cop. We don't need to be in the Middle East. Those people are barbarians who are never going to understand that democracy is a good thing. Let's just make our country great again, right? That's the promise.
Except he's not consistent on that because
No,
he
he's not.
wants to destroy ISIS,
Yeah,
by
in
which he
in 5
means
minutes. Yeah.
presumably a Putin level bombing campaign.
Or maybe a nuclear one. Why can't we use our nukes? We've got them. Shouldn't we be using them?
What this does, and again, what you have to understand, we always project from our current situation and think things continue as they do. No, these kind of movements seize upon events. The events change our reality, and the emotions that can be summoned up and manipulated in these processes. The mass emotions, especially when we have no elite controlling media anymore, when it's completely free fire zone, is incredibly dangerous. I mean, Here's another thing I would point out. There was a story about business leaders who don't support Trump in the New York Times a couple of weeks ago,
Mhm.
and none of them would go on the record. Why? Because they all feared personal retribution. And we all know it.
Just incredibly craven.
It's a craven. On the other hand, it's also clear that he would do that. I mean, he's
Yeah.
talked about the presidency, someone who call up the head of a company. I mean, he would do the equivalent of bills of attainder on individuals and dissenters. He has threatened the owner of the Washington Post with using the antitrust regulations to go after him if the Washington Post opposes him.
Hmm.
I mean, this is completely dictatorial behavior. It has nothing to do with a free society.
So just to put a fine point on this, because given all of the heinous things we have said about the Clintons and Hillary in particular, why does it matter that she be in charge as opposed to him? I mean, when you would just imagine going forward in dealing with Russia or China or the problem of jihadism or anything else, any other challenge we're going to face, why do you feel that there really is a difference here worth caring about? Because many people think they're both liars. They both, her husband's a rapist, he's a rapist, or they're both at the very least trailing accusations of rape. There's ugliness on both sides.
Because he uniquely threatens our entire political system from within, and he uniquely threatens global stability in a way that no president, no candidate for president has ever done in this country. Just because we haven't been here before, there's this amazing complacency about what can happen in a democracy. And if you've read history and you see this happening, it is textbook for how democracies perish. It is incredibly dangerous, at a level that completely outside any previous candidate for the presidency, outside anything in American history short of the 1860s.
But spell that out a little more. It's outside any precedent with respect
to the basic rules of liberal democracy, the basic core constructing ideas that make us the West.